The stage manager's clipboard hit the floor. Nobody stopped to pick it up. It was December 18th, 1979, NBC Studios, Burbank, California. The Tonight Show was 22 minutes into its broadcast. Johnny Carson mid-monologue about the Iranian hostage crisis, the audience warm and laughing, the studio machinery running in that frictionless way it ran on good nights, when the rhythm between host and room felt less like television and more like something alive. The lights were warm. The coffee mug on Johnny's desk was steaming. Nobody was thinking about anything except the next punchline. Nobody was thinking about the door. The security officer on post that night was a man named Gerald Poole. Gerald had worked the Tonight Show backstage entrance for 11 years. He had seen Frank Sinatra stroll through that door at midnight, wearing a tuxedo and holding a martini. He had seen Katharine Hepburn materialize like something carved from pure New England granite, tolerating nobody's nonsense. He had seen Walter Cronkite walk through that door weeping, quietly and without explanation, after a broadcast he never publicly discussed. Gerald Poole did not rattle easily. But when he looked up from his desk at 11:52 that December evening and saw who was standing 20 feet away in the corridor, his hand stopped moving. His pen stopped moving. The crossword puzzle he had been working on for 40 minutes stopped mattering entirely. Bob Hope was standing in the backstage hallway of The Tonight Show, 76 years old. 6 feet of American legend, slightly thinner than the last time Gerald had seen him on television, the famous profile unmistakable even under the flat corridor fluorescence. He was wearing a dark suit, no tie, silver-white hair combed back with the precision of a man who still believed in showing up properly even when everything else around him was in disorder. No publicist, no assistant, no entourage, none of the apparatus that surrounded men of his stature the way an atmosphere surrounds a planet. He was completely alone, and he was holding something pressed flat against his chest with both hands. A folded envelope, cream-colored, worn at the edges the way paper gets worn when it has been handled many times over many years, and then put away and then picked up again and put away again. The way paper gets worn when someone has been trying to decide what to do with it for a very long time. Gerald stood up. "Mr. Hope, sir, you are not on tonight's schedule." Bob Hope turned toward him. Those eyes, famous from 60 years of film and television, were different in person, darker, more still. Tonight they carried something Gerald recognized not from any film but from life, from the faces of people he had known who were carrying something they could no longer carry alone. "I need to see Johnny," Hope said, not before the show, during it. "Tell Fred de Cordova that Bob Hope is here and that it cannot wait until tomorrow." Gerald reached for his radio. But something stopped him. Maybe it was the paper. Maybe it was the way Hope was holding it, pressed against his chest with both palms, the way you carry something you are terrified to put down even for a moment. Maybe it was the sound of the Tonight Show audience laughing faintly through the studio walls, while this man stood in the hallway outside and held something to his chest like it was the only thing keeping him upright. Gerald set the radio down. He picked up the desk phone instead. What you are about to hear happened on live American television. 29 million people saw it unfold. Newspapers covered it for 3 weeks. Mental health professionals played recordings of it in offices and waiting rooms for years afterward. And yet the full story behind it, the reason Bob Hope drove himself to NBC that night without calling ahead, the thing locked in his desk drawer for 11 years while the world pinned medals to his chest and called him the most patriotic entertainer America had ever produced. That story has never been fully told. Not until now. To understand what Bob Hope was holding in that corridor, you have to go backward. Through all the holiday specials and the Presidential Medal of Freedom and the congressional tributes, all the way back to a different December. A December that was not warm and not celebratory and not anything that anyone who lived through it was in a hurry to revisit. December 1968, Vietnam. Over 16,000 American service members killed that year. The Tet Offensive had shattered the government's claim that the war was being won. The country at home was fracturing. Cities burned. Campuses burned. Robert Kennedy was gone. Martin Luther King was gone. The year had taken things from the American imagination that would not come back. And Bob Hope went to Vietnam anyway. He had been going since 1964, every Christmas. The USO tours he organized and headlined had become a ritual, a signal to the men overseas that the country had not forgotten them, that the holidays still meant something even in a place where very little felt like it meant anything. He organized shows in open fields, on military bases aboard aircraft carriers, at field hospitals where patients were carried in on stretchers to watch. He did it because he believed it mattered, because he understood, in a way probably unique to him, exactly what it did to a young man far from home to look up and see something familiar. Something that said, "We know you are out there. We have not forgotten. In December of 1968, Bob Hope's tour made 21 stops in 11 days, 14 in active combat zones. The security briefings were serious, and Hope sat through all of them with the same attention he gave his best writers, which was total. He was never naive about where he was. But what happened at the 21st stop, the final show of the 1968 tour at a fire base in Quang Tri Province on December 23rd, was something no briefing had prepared him for. Because it did not happen during the show. It did not happen in front of the cameras. It happened after. The show ran 2 hours. 1,400 soldiers packed into a makeshift outdoor amphitheater built from salvaged lumber and aircraft landing mats. The temperature was in the high 80s, the humidity absolute. Hope did his monologue about Nixon's election, and the Paris peace talks that everyone in that audience understood were going nowhere. The laughter that came back to him was the particular laughter of people who had to find something funny in their situation, or let the situation find something in them instead. He understood that laughter at a cellular level. He had understood it since 1942. After the show, Hope and his company moved through the crowd the way they always did, shaking hands, signing whatever the soldiers handed them, listening. Bob Hope had spent decades developing the ability to make whoever he was talking to feel, for the duration of that exchange, like the only person he had come to see. He was 90 minutes into the post-show when a soldier stepped forward, 20 years old, maybe 21, a private first class by the chevron on his sleeve. He had a face that was simultaneously easy and impossible to describe. The face of a young man who belonged in a particular kind of kitchen on a particular kind of street and was as far from that kitchen as the world could manage to put it. He was holding a folded piece of paper, Mr. Hope. He said it the way young men say things to people they have spent a long time thinking about meeting, carefully, like the words had been rehearsed and the rehearsal had helped somewhat but not entirely. Hope stopped. He gave the soldier his full attention, the way he always did with the ones who stepped forward holding something, because those were invariably the ones who needed the moment most. The soldier's name was Private First Class James Kowalski, from Youngstown, Ohio, 20 years old, 7 months in country, 3rd Battalion of the 196th Infantry Brigade. He had survived 3 firefights, 1 ambush, 1 rocket attack that killed 2 men in his platoon he considered friends. He held out the paper. "I wrote this for my mom," he said. "Mail's been held up 2 weeks, and Christmas is 2 days away, and she doesn't know I'm all right. She's by herself. My dad passed in the spring." He stopped. His voice hadn't broken, but it had the quality of a voice being held very deliberately in one place. "I was wondering if maybe there was any chance you'd be anywhere near Youngstown when you got back." Bob Hope looked at the letter. He looked at James Kowalski. Then he reached out and took it from the young man's hands. "I will deliver this personally," Hope said, without hesitation, without consulting his schedule, without calculating the 3 weeks of commitments already booked between his return and Christmas Day. He said it the way you say something when the right thing to do is perfectly visible, and the only question is whether you have the character to do it. James Kowalski's face changed. The relief on it was immediate and complete. The kind a young man shows when he has been holding something frightened inside himself for a long time, and someone tells him he doesn't have to hold it alone anymore. "Thank you, Mr. Hope. Her name is Eleanor. Eleanor Kowalski. The address is on the back. I'll find her," Hope said. 2 days. "I promise." He put the letter in the inside pocket of his jacket. He moved on through the crowd. He shook 200 more hands that evening and signed autographs and listened and laughed and did everything he had traveled 27 hours to do. But what happened next is the part that took 11 years to say out loud. Wait, do not move past this. Because what happened on December 24th, 1968, one day after Bob Hope made that promise in Quang Tri, is the reason 11 years later a man was standing in the backstage corridor of The Tonight Show holding an envelope against his chest, trying to decide if he was finally capable of walking through the door. Bob Hope returned to the United States on December 24th. He had the letter in his jacket pocket, the name Eleanor Kowalski, the address on the back, and a promise that was specific and timed and clear. On Christmas morning, the telephone rang. His contact at the Department of Defense, a man whose voice he recognized, who said what he had to say with the directness of someone who had made this kind of call before and knew there was no way to soften it. Private First Class James Kowalski had been killed in action on December 24th, 1968, one day after handing his letter to Bob Hope at a firebase in Quang Tri. A mortar round struck his position during a pre-dawn patrol. He was the only fatality. He was 20 years old. Bob Hope set the receiver down. He sat in his home office without moving. The letter was in the pocket of his jacket, folded over a chair across the room. He looked at the jacket. He did not get up. He sat with the question that would occupy the next 11 years of his life. What do you do now? Do you go to Youngstown on Christmas Day and hand Eleanor Kowalski a letter from her son that said he was coming home, and then tell her he is never coming home? Do you give this to a woman who has already lost her husband? Already alone in that house? He did not go. He told himself he would go in January. He told himself the family needed time. He told himself appearing on Christmas Day would be a cruelty dressed as compassion. January came and went, February, March. The letter moved from his jacket pocket to his desk drawer. It did not move again for 11 years. What you have seen so far is only the surface of what this story actually is. Because the letter in Bob Hope's desk was not just a tragedy, it was a decision. Every morning for 11 years, Bob Hope went to his desk, and the letter was there, and he made a choice. The choice most human beings make when confronted with a pain they cannot find the right angle to enter. He left it alone. He let the days accumulate between himself and the thing he owed. The USO tours continued. 1969, 1970, 1971. Each Christmas, he went back. He shook the hands of young soldiers with the same faces James Kowalski had. He made them laugh and told them America remembered them. He came home and put the letter in the drawer. The awards came, the Congressional Gold Medal, the honorary degrees. People called him the most patriotic entertainer in American history. Selfless, devoted. He accepted every tribute with the warmth and self-deprecation that had been his armor since vaudeville. And he said nothing about the drawer. He did not know, in those 11 years, whether Eleanor Kowalski was still alive. He knew her address, written in her son's handwriting on the back of the envelope, the handwriting of a boy who expected the letter to travel through the normal postal system and arrive in a normal way. He was a man who had spent 60 years being professionally articulate, who could walk into any room in the world and find exactly the right register. And for 11 years he could not find the words to walk to a door in Youngstown, Ohio and say, "Your son gave me this. I am sorry it took so long." December 1979. Bob Hope was 76 years old. His doctors had recently used the words manageable and monitoring and early. He had sat in their office and heard those words and understood what they were saying beneath the careful phrasing. He was not a man unfamiliar with the clarity that certain information produces when it lands correctly. He looked at the drawer. He opened it. He took out the envelope. Cream-colored paper gone ivory with age, edges soft, the handwriting on the back still clear. Eleanor Kowalski, a street address in Youngstown, the zip code in neat numerals. He had been holding this so long that holding it had become its own structure. A wound tended so long it had grown inseparable from the hand that tended it. He did not know how to put it down. He did not know if he deserved to find out. But he knew who he needed to be with when he tried. He and Johnny Carson had known each other for 19 years. What had developed between them was not the transactional warmth that passed for friendship in Hollywood. It was something more durable and less performed. They were men who understood what it cost to be funny, who knew exactly what the cameras didn't show, who had conversations in dressing rooms and on the telephone at strange hours that neither would have had with almost anyone else, conversations where neither man was performing. If there was anyone in front of whom Bob Hope could do what he needed to do, it was Johnny Carson. He did not call ahead. He was afraid that if he called, he would talk himself out of it the way he had every December for 11 years. Afraid that the moment he heard his own voice say the words on a telephone, the words would hear themselves and decide they were not ready. So he put on his dark suit, combed his hair, took the envelope, and drove to NBC Studios. He walked through the backstage door, found Gerald Poole, and said, "I need to see Johnny. It cannot wait." In the control room, Fred DeCordova received Gerald's call at 11:54 p.m. Fred had produced The Tonight Show for nearly a decade and handled every category of unexpected development television could generate. His composure under pressure was well documented. He lost it, briefly, when Gerald described what was in the corridor. Fred walked to the stage entrance, confirmed through the curtain gap that yes, it was Bob Hope, alone, holding something against his chest in a way that Fred DeCordova had no category for in 30 years of television. He went to Johnny during the next commercial break. Johnny was reviewing his segment cards when Fred appeared and said 3 words. Bob Hope, backstage. Johnny set the cards face down. He looked at Fred's face. It communicated everything. This was not a promotional surprise or a kept secret drop-in. This was something else entirely. "Is he all right?" Johnny asked. "Physically, yes. But Johnny, he looks like a man who drove here tonight to say something he has been afraid to say for a very long time." Back from commercial in 90 seconds, Johnny was quiet. Then, "Bring him to the stage entrance. When we come back from commercial, let him walk out." Fred's eyes widened. "On air without any announcement?" If Bob Hope drove himself to this studio at midnight on a Tuesday without calling anyone, then whatever he is carrying is more important than the format. Bring him out. Fred hesitated 3 seconds. Then he nodded and disappeared. Johnny pressed both hands flat against the desk. Ed McMahon leaned over. Johnny, what's going on? Bob Hope is backstage, Ed. He's coming out in 90 seconds. I don't know why. Stay with me on this. Whatever happens, stay with me. 30 seconds to air. Johnny pushed his segment cards to the side. Whatever was about to happen, the cards were not going to help. The cameras went live. And then, from behind the stage curtain, without music, without introduction, without any of the production fanfare that normally accompanied a guest of this magnitude, Bob Hope walked onto the Tonight Show stage. The audience saw him before Johnny did. A woman in the third row gasped, a sharp intake of breath that reached the nearest microphone. Then the man beside her. Then, in the rapid spreading way recognition moves through a crowd when someone truly famous appears without warning, all 310 people understood simultaneously what they were seeing. They stood up, not applauding, not cheering, just standing. The way people stand when something significant is entering the room, and the standing is involuntary. The body acknowledging weight before the mind has finished processing it. Johnny turned. He stood immediately. Not the practice stand of the polished host, but the unplanned stand of a man who has seen something on his friend's face that makes the desk and the cameras and the structure of live television temporarily irrelevant. He walked around the desk. He did not extend his hand. He stood in front of Bob Hope and looked at him with the directness that had always been, when he allowed himself to use it without performance, the most powerful thing he possessed. Bob, what is it? The studio was completely still. Bob Hope looked at Johnny. He looked at the audience. He looked at the cameras. And then he said the thing that cracked the silence the way a sound cracks when it has been sealed in a closed space too long and finally finds the seam. Johnny, he said, I came here tonight because I owe a debt I've been carrying for 11 years. I can't carry it by myself anymore. I needed to not be alone when I finally put it down. Nobody moved. Johnny made a gesture toward the guest chair, gentle, unhurried, the gesture of a man who understood that whatever was happening here would take whatever time it needed. Then sit down, Bob, and tell me. They sat. The cameras found their positions without being directed to, the operators moving on instinct, understanding without instruction that this needed to be captured with care. Bob Hope reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. He removed the envelope, cream-colored, ivory with age, worn edges visible even from the back rows. He set it on the desk between them. This letter was written by a 20-year-old boy named James Kowalski, from Youngstown, Ohio, on December 23, 1968. He handed it to me after a USO show in Quang Tri Province and asked me to deliver it to his mother because the mail had been held up 2 weeks and Christmas was 2 days away and he wanted her to know he was all right. He stopped. He breathed once, carefully. I promised him I would deliver it personally. The studio was so quiet you could hear the hum of the cameras. He was killed the next day. December 24th, mortar attack. He was the only fatality. The silence that followed was the particular silence of 310 people and 29 million more receiving information that takes a moment to become fully real, to travel from the ears into the understanding and settle there. I couldn't deliver it, Hope said. I couldn't figure out how to stand at his mother's door and hand her a letter that said he was coming home and instead tell her he was never coming home. So I put it in my desk. His voice was steady. The steadiness was costing him something that everyone watching could feel the cost of. And 11 years went by. Johnny Carson looked at the envelope on the desk. He reached out and rested his hand beside it, not touching it, just near it. The way you put your hand near something that carries a gravity you need to acknowledge without claiming. Do you know, Johnny asked quietly, whether his mother is still alive? Bob Hope nodded slowly. I found out last month. Her name is Eleanor. She's still in Youngstown. She's 73. He paused, and what he said next fully broke the room open. She has a granddaughter she's never met. James had a daughter from a relationship before he deployed. The girl is 11 years old. Eleanor doesn't know she exists. The first sound from the audience was not crying. It was breath, the involuntary exhale when something becomes too large to hold in the chest. Then the crying came, moving through the studio the way sound moves through water, in rings outward until it reached every corner. A camera operator near stage left turned his face, but didn't stop working. Ed McMahon sat utterly still, eyes closed. Johnny Carson was not crying. He was doing what he did when emotion arrived at a register he hadn't anticipated. He became very still, very present, as though all of his resources had redirected toward the simple act of being exactly where he was. Bob, he said, do you want to read it? Bob Hope looked at the envelope. A long moment in which nothing in the studio moved, and the only sounds were the electrical hum of the equipment, and somewhere in the audience a soft, sustained sound of shared waiting. He picked up the envelope, worked the flap open, resealed with tape, visible at the edges. He unfolded the letter with the deliberateness of a man opening something for the last time. Held it in both hands. Looked at the handwriting before reading the shape of a 20-year-old's letters, the particular way an ordinary young man from Ohio held his pen. Then he read, "Dear Mom, I know you're probably worried. I know, because you're you and that's what you do, and I want you to know right now that I'm all right. I'm better than all right. Tonight I saw Bob Hope do a show for us out here, and I laughed harder than I've laughed since I got here. It reminded me what it feels like to be a person and not just a soldier. I'm going to be home in 5 months. I'm going to eat your pierogi. I'm going to sit on the porch with you, and we're going to watch the Youngstown night come in the way we always used to. And I'm going to tell you every single thing that happened to me here because you're the only person I trust with all of it. Save me some of the good coffee. I love you more than I know how to say. You're James." Bob Hope folded the letter. He set it on Johnny Carson's desk. He said nothing. He did not need to. The room said everything that needed to be said in the particular wordless language of shared feeling. That is the only adequate response to a truth that has been sealed in a drawer for 11 years and has finally found its way into the light. Johnny Carson took Bob Hope's hand in both of his own, and he held it, just held it. The way you hold someone's hand when they have set down something very heavy and the setting down has left them slightly unsteady in the world. They sat like that for a long moment. The orchestra silent, the cameras holding, nobody directing them, nobody needing to. Then Johnny said quietly, "What happens now, Bob?" Hope looked at the camera, at America. He said, "Now I go to Youngstown. I knock on Eleanor Kowalski's door, and I give her the letter her son wrote, and I tell her it took me 11 years to do what I promised, and I am sorry. I am going to be sorry to her in person." His eyes moved back to the desk, "and I'm going to tell her about her granddaughter. Because Eleanor Kowalski has a granddaughter who is 11 years old, and she doesn't know she exists. And they have already lost 11 years they should have had together." The studio erupted. Not in applause. In something more complex, the sound of 310 people processing simultaneously the tragedy and the improbable grace of what they had just witnessed. NBC switchboard went down at 12:41 a.m., every line busy before the East Coast broadcast ended. By 3 in the morning, more calls than any single broadcast in Tonight Show history. Not from fans of Bob Hope. From people with their own version of the letter, their own drawer, their own January decision to wait until February, their own 11 years. Veterans called. Gold Star families called. Men who had served and never told anyone what they had seen asked for the first time if there was someone to talk to about it. Mental health lines reported call volume so unusual that several organizations filed formal reports, not because people were in crisis, but because they were finally ready to do something with what they had been carrying. Bob Hope flew to Youngstown 2 days after the broadcast, alone, no cameras, no press. He knocked on Eleanor Kowalski's door on a Thursday afternoon when the temperature was 11 degrees. Eleanor came to the door in her housecoat. She did not recognize him at first in the winter coat and hat, and then she did. He told her he had a letter. She brought him inside, made coffee. He stayed 4 hours. What happened in that house is private as it should be. There are things that do not belong to television. They belong only to the people who were in the room and the absence of the person who should have been there, and the particular kind of forgiveness that happens between strangers connected by someone they both loved and who is gone. What Hope said when he came back, when reporters who had learned of the visit asked what had happened. "She forgave me before I finished the apology. She said James would have wanted me to bring it when I was ready and not before. She said he was always patient that way." He paused before adding the last part. "I've been doing this work for 40 years, and I have never felt smaller, and I have never felt more grateful in the same moment. That's what she gave me." Eleanor Kowalski met her granddaughter in January 1980. They sat in Eleanor's kitchen in Youngstown and drank hot chocolate, and Eleanor showed the girl photographs of James from before deployment. And the girl looked at the father she had never known and saw where she came from. Bob Hope performed his final USO tour in 1990. He was 87 years old. He told the troops the same things he had always told them. And then he told them something he had never told any previous audience. He told them about James Kowalski, the letter, the drawer, the 11 years. The fact that the bravest thing he had done in a life that included walking into active combat zones was driving to NBC Studios one December night and sitting across from his oldest friend and saying out loud, "I made a promise, I failed to keep it, and the failure has been eating me alive." He said, when you get home, say the things that need to be said. Don't wait for the right moment. It will not come find you. You have to build it yourself. If you cannot build it alone, find someone to sit across from. That is what Johnny was for me that night. Find your person. Say the thing. Bob Hope passed away on July 27, 2003. He was 100 years old. The tribute that drew the most lasting attention was not an official statement. It was a private letter from a woman named Sarah, James Kowalski's daughter, 35 years old, when she wrote it. She wrote, "He kept his promise. It took 11 years, but he kept it. Because he did, I exist in my grandmother's life the way I should have always existed. He gave us back to each other." That is what the letter did. And that is what he did by finally delivering it. When Johnny Carson retired from The Tonight Show in 1992, a reporter asked him what he considered the single most memorable broadcast of his 30-year tenure. He didn't take long. December 18, 1979, he said. Bob Hope walked onto my stage without warning and told the truth in front of 29 million people. He was 76 years old. He was terrified. He did it anyway. He put something down he had been carrying for 11 years, and he didn't do it in private because doing it in private wouldn't have been enough to break what needed to be broken. He needed witnesses. He needed to not be alone when he set it down, and he chose my stage for that. Carson paused. That night taught me what this show was actually for, not entertainment. Entertainment is what the show does. What the show is for, what it has always been for, is to be the place where the thing nobody is saying finally gets said. Where the truth that has been living in someone's drawer for 11 years finally gets to be in the room. He looked at the reporter. Bob Hope was the bravest person I ever sat across from in 30 years. Not because of the combat zones, because of that envelope. If this story moved you, if it put something in your chest you recognize, something that belongs to a conversation you haven't had yet, a promise you made and haven't kept, a letter you wrote and never sent, let that feeling be the signal. Not the obstacle, the signal. There is an Eleanor Kowalski in someone's life right now waiting for something sitting in a drawer. There is a Sarah who doesn't yet know her grandmother exists. There is a 20-year-old in a firebase somewhere who handed his letter to someone and trusted them. Do not let 11 more years go by. Subscribe and share this with the person who has something in their drawer. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from tonight. This story is reaching people everywhere, and I want to know where the truth is landing. And if you have your own version of the letter, your own drawer, tell us about it here. You do not have to carry it alone. That is what Bob Hope drove across Burbank to prove on a Tuesday night in December 44 years ago. You do not have to carry it alone.